He laughed when security almost blocked her shabby dress at the gangway, but the entire deck went silent when 3 little boys broke free from her hands and ran straight to him yelling, "Daddy!" in front of 200 millionaire guests. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Boston, 2017. Sofia Rodriguez adjusted her only blazer, a navy blue second-hand affair she'd purchased for conference presentations, and reviewed her notes one last time. The MIT conference on biotechnology economics sprawled before her, a sea of privileged faces and designer suits that made her simple outfit feel woefully inadequate. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and straightened her shoulders. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, a ritual inherited from her mother. "6 años de sacrificios para estar aquí. Don't waste it." 6 years of sacrifices indeed. Her parents had crossed the Mexican border with barely $100 between them, working multiple jobs to give their daughter opportunities they never had. Now, with her full scholarship to MIT's economics program, Sofia was determined to make those sacrifices count. When her name was called, Sofia approached the podium with practiced confidence that masked her racing heart. Her presentation on cost-efficient distribution models for essential medications flowed more smoothly than she had anticipated. The audience, initially distracted and disinterested, gradually engaged as her passion for accessible healthcare became evident. "The current pricing model for life-saving medications is fundamentally flawed," she concluded. "We don't just need new drugs. We need new ways to get existing treatments to people who can't afford 5-figure annual costs. Thank you." The applause was polite but uninspired, except for one pair of hands that continued clapping after others had stopped. Sofia noticed him immediately. Tall, impeccably dressed in what she recognized as a bespoke suit, with neatly trimmed blonde hair and the confident posture of someone born into privilege. At the post-presentation cocktail reception, Sofia stood alone, nursing a single glass of champagne while scrolling through emails on her phone. A pretense, really. She knew no one important enough to be messaging her during the conference. "Your distribution model is ambitious, revolutionary even." The voice came from behind her, smooth and self-assured. She turned to find the blond man from the audience, now standing close enough that she could see his eyes were the same deep blue as his custom-tailored suit. "Thank you," she replied cautiously, expecting the critique that usually followed such openings from industry professionals. "Blake Thompson," he offered his hand, CFO of Thompson Pharmaceuticals. Sofia nearly choked on her champagne. Thompson Pharmaceuticals was one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the East Coast, notorious for their premium pricing strategies, exactly the kind of business model she had just critiqued. "Sofia Rodriguez," she managed, taking his hand. "I'm surprised someone from Thompson would find anything positive in my presentation." His smile was disarmingly genuine. "Just because I work within the current system doesn't mean I can't appreciate fresh perspectives. Your model has some flaws, but the core concept is intriguing." Their conversation flowed with unexpected ease. Blake asked questions that demonstrated he'd actually listened to her presentation, challenging her assumptions, but without the condescension she often encountered from pharmaceutical executives. "Where did you develop such passion for pharmaceutical accessibility?" he asked as they moved to a quieter corner of the reception. "My parents crossed the border with just $100 to give me opportunities," Sofia found herself revealing. "My father developed diabetes 2 years later but couldn't afford insulin. He rationed it until he collapsed at work. We were lucky. A community clinic helped us. Others aren't so fortunate." Something shifted in Blake's expression. Not pity, but something more complex. "That's not the typical origin story for MIT economists." "I'm not typical," Sofia replied with a small smile. "I'm beginning to see that." Blake glanced at his watch. "Have you had dinner? There's a restaurant nearby, Menton. We could continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable." Sofia hesitated. She'd heard of Menton, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, where entrees cost more than her weekly grocery budget. As if reading her thoughts, Blake added, "My treat, of course. Consider it Thompson Pharmaceuticals' investment in fresh perspectives." 3 hours later, sitting across from Blake at a corner table with panoramic views of Boston Harbor, Sophia couldn't believe how the evening had unfolded. The menu had no prices, a detail that both thrilled and terrified her, and Blake had ordered for them both with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in such places. "You're different from the other economists I meet," Blake commented, swirling his wine. "They're all theory and market efficiency. You actually care about the human impact." "Isn't that the point of economics? To improve human welfare?" Sophia challenged. "In theory. In practice, it's usually about quarterly reports and shareholder value." He leaned forward. "What if you could apply your ideas within an existing framework? Someone with your perspective inside a company like Thompson could drive real change." The conversation continued long after dessert was cleared, and when Blake's private car arrived to take her home, Sophia found herself reluctantly ending an evening she hadn't expected to enjoy. "This is me," she said, as the luxury sedan pulled up to her modest student apartment building in Cambridge. Blake looked out the window, surprise briefly flashing across his features at the shabby exterior. "May I walk you to your door?" Her tiny studio apartment suddenly seemed embarrassingly small and sparse as she unlocked the door, acutely aware of Blake's presence behind her. A stack of textbooks served as her nightstand. Her desk was a repurposed kitchen table from Goodwill. The single window overlooked a brick wall. "It's not much," she said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "But the price is right with my scholarship." Blake looked around, then back at her with newfound respect. "You know what I see? I see someone who prioritizes education over comfort. That's rare, Sophia." His words dissolved her embarrassment. For the first time that evening, she felt truly seen, not as a charity case or a diversity quota, but as someone whose choices reflected her values. "I'd like to see you again," Blake said as he prepared to leave. "Are you free this weekend?" 2 weeks later, Sophia still couldn't believe how quickly her life had changed. Blake had become a constant presence, introducing her to a Boston she'd never known existed. They dined at restaurants where chefs greeted him by name, attended gallery openings where artists sought his opinion, and spent evenings discussing everything from market economics to favorite childhood books. "This is Sofia Rodriguez," Blake introduced her to a group of pharmaceutical executives at a charity gala. "She's the most brilliant mind I've ever encountered at MIT." The executives, initially dismissive of the young Latina woman in her carefully selected but obviously not designer dress, shifted their attention when Blake added, "Her distribution model could revolutionize how we approach emerging markets. Stanford's already expressed interest in her postdoctoral work." This was news to Sophia, who hadn't applied to Stanford, but she played along, understanding that Blake was elevating her status in their eyes. Later that night, alone in his penthouse overlooking the Charles River, she questioned him about it. "Why did you say that about Stanford?" Blake handed her a glass of wine. "Because they wouldn't have listened otherwise. They need to see you as valuable in terms they understand." "So you lied." "I expedited their respect," he corrected. "You deserve to be heard, Sophia. I'm just making sure you are." Before she could argue further, Blake surprised her with news that drove all other thoughts from her mind. "Pack an overnight bag for tomorrow. I want to show you my world." "What do you mean?" His smile was mysteriously pleased. "Just be ready at 9. Dress casually." The casual helicopter ride to Martha's Vineyard the next morning was anything but ordinary for Sophia. As they soared over the Massachusetts coastline, Blake pointed out landmarks and shared stories of summers spent sailing between exclusive coastal enclaves. "I've never been in a helicopter before," Sophia admitted, wide-eyed as the island came into view. "Then I'm honored to be your first," Blake replied, squeezing her hand. "You are experiencing so many things for the first time. It's refreshing to see the world through your eyes." The weekend unfolded like a dream. Private beaches, dinner at a restaurant where the owner embraced Blake like family, and long walks along shorelines where each home was more magnificent than the last. "Have you always been this rich?" Sophia asked bluntly as they watched the sunset from the deck of his family's summer home. Blake laughed, not offended by her directness. "Yes, but that doesn't mean I don't understand value. My grandfather started Thompson with one patent and built it through strategic acquisitions. We've never forgotten that everything can disappear if you make the wrong decisions." 3 months into their relationship, Sophia finally gathered the courage to invite Blake to dinner with her parents. Their small apartment in Dorchester felt even more cramped with his commanding presence, but her parents had prepared their best meal, her mother's famous chile rellenos and her father's special occasion flan. "Su hija es extraordinaria," Blake surprised them by saying in carefully practiced Spanish. "She's changing how I see our entire industry." Her father, initially stiff and formal with the wealthy Anglo businessman dating his daughter, gradually warmed as Blake showed genuine interest in his work as a maintenance supervisor. Her mother, more direct, eventually pulled Sophia aside in the kitchen. "Él te mira como si fueras un tesoro," she whispered. "He looks at you like you're a treasure." That night, after Blake dropped her at her apartment, Sophia stayed up late studying for finals. Her phone buzzed with a message just as she was about to fall asleep. "Blake, you changed something in me tonight. Your family's love for each other, despite having so little materially. It made me question what real wealth looks like. Thank you for sharing that with me." Sophia stared at the message, something warm blossoming in her chest. For all his privilege, Blake seemed genuinely willing to see beyond his insulated world. The following week, Blake surprised her by attending her presentation on pharmaceutical supply chain economics, sitting in the back of the lecture hall and giving her a discreet thumbs up when she glanced his way. Afterward, he took her to dinner at a seafood restaurant overlooking the ocean. "You were brilliant today," he said, raising his glass. "The way you challenged traditional distribution channels while acknowledging market realities, it was masterful. My professor didn't think so. He called it naively idealistic." "Your professor is protecting an outdated system," Blake countered. "The future belongs to innovators like you." As waves crashed against the shore outside the restaurant windows, Blake reached across the table and took her hand. "I love you, Sofia Rodriguez," he said simply. "You've shown me a perspective on life I never knew I was missing." The words caught her completely off guard. 3 months felt fast. Too fast, perhaps. But the sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. "I love you too," she replied, surprised to find she meant it. 2 months later, sitting on the bathroom floor of her tiny apartment, Sophia stared at the positive pregnancy test in disbelief. Her period was only 2 weeks late. She'd attributed it to stress from finals and her new internship at Goldman Sachs. But the 2 pink lines were unmistakable. Her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach as conflicting emotions washed over her. Fear, certainly. She was only 26, still a student, with career plans that didn't include motherhood for at least 5 more years. But underneath the fear lay an unexpected current of joy. Blake had spoken often of wanting a family someday. He'd mentioned children in abstract terms, describing the education he wanted for them, the values he hoped to instill. Would he be happy about this unexpected acceleration of those someday plans? As she looked at the positive test, Sophia allowed herself to imagine telling Blake over a special dinner. She pictured his face transitioning from shock to joy, imagined him kneeling beside her chair to speak directly to her belly, making elaborate plans for their future as a family. While she stared at the pregnancy test in wonder, Sophia had no way of knowing that this moment of joy would precede the most painful abandonment a woman could face. While staring at the positive pregnancy test in wonder, Sophia had no way of knowing that this moment of joy would precede the most painful abandonment a woman could face. Her mind raced with thoughts of the future, a future with Blake and their child. a family of her own creation alongside her blossoming career. 2 weeks later, Sophia sat in Dr. Klein's office, her hands clutching the edge of the examination table as the obstetrician studied the ultrasound screen with a furrowed brow. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm seeing something quite unusual here," Dr. Klein said, adjusting the ultrasound wand across Sophia's still flat stomach. "Is something wrong with the baby?" Sophia's voice caught in her throat. "Not wrong, but—" The doctor turned the screen toward her. "Do you see these 3 separate formations? Congratulations, you're carrying triplets." Sophia's world tilted on its axis. "Triplets? That's impossible. Rare, certainly, but not impossible, especially with your family history of fraternal twins on your mother's side." Dr. Klein continued explaining statistics and prenatal care recommendations, but Sophia barely heard anything past the word triplets. 3 babies, 3 heartbeats, 3 lives growing inside her. After the appointment, Sophia walked through Boston Common in a daze, one hand protectively covering her abdomen. The initial shock gradually gave way to a strange, fierce determination. This wasn't her plan, not the timing, certainly not the number, but these were her children. She would find a way. That evening she called Blake and suggested dinner at Beacon Hill, an elegant restaurant where they had celebrated her scholarship renewal months earlier. The significance of the location wasn't lost on him. Beacon Hill? Something special to celebrate? Blake's voice sounded distracted. She could hear papers shuffling in the background. "You could say that. Friday at 8? I'll have my assistant make the reservation." Friday evening arrived with uncharacteristic punctuality from Boston's fickle spring weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze, and blooming cherry trees lining the streets near the restaurant. Sophia had chosen her outfit carefully, a simple burgundy dress that made her feel confident, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for graduation. She arrived early, rehearsing different approaches in her head. Direct and straightforward seemed best. "Blake, I'm pregnant with triplets. We're having 3 babies." The maitre d' led her to a window table overlooking the illuminated city skyline. She ordered water and declined bread, her stomach too knotted with anticipation to consider eating yet. Blake arrived 20 minutes late. "Sorry," he said, sliding into his seat without kissing her, unusual for him. "Board meeting ran long. The acquisition in Philadelphia is hitting regulatory hurdles." He checked his phone twice before even looking at her properly. When he finally did, his expression softened slightly. "You look beautiful tonight. What's the occasion?" Sophia took a deep breath. "Blake, there's something important I need to tell you. Can it wait until after I order a drink? It's been a day from hell." He signaled the waiter without waiting for her response. After ordering an 18-year-old scotch, Blake leaned back in his chair. "Now what's this big news?" "I'm pregnant," Sophia said, the words tumbling out before she could arrange them more gracefully. Blake froze, his expression unreadable. "You're what?" "Pregnant. With triplets, actually." "Triplets?" He set his untouched scotch down with deliberate care. "That's biologically improbable." His words, clinical, detached, were not what she had expected. Not joy, perhaps, given the surprise, but not this cold assessment either. "Improbable, but true. I saw the ultrasound yesterday. 3 separate heartbeats." Blake's eyes narrowed, a coldness entering them that Sophia had never seen before. "Who else have you been with?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "Triplets are extremely rare without fertility treatments. Who else have you been sleeping with?" Sophia felt blood rush to her face, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "No one! How can you even ask me that? You know I've only been with you." Several diners at nearby tables glanced their way. Blake's jaw tightened as he leaned forward, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Be reasonable, Sophia. This doesn't make sense. We've only been together for 6 months." "It doesn't have to make sense, Blake. It's happening. I'm carrying your children, our children." Blake's expression shifted. calculation replacing accusation. He took a long sip of his scotch, then set it down with deliberate precision. "This will ruin everything," he said finally. "Your studies, your career prospects. You're about to graduate with honors. Think about what you're throwing away." "I'm not throwing anything away," Sophia countered, though doubt flickered briefly. "Yes, the timing is challenging, but we can make it work, together." Blake laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Together? Sophia, be realistic. Do you have any idea what my family would say? What the board would think?" "I don't care what they think," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "This isn't about them." "Everything in my life is about them," he snapped. "The Thompson name stands for something in Boston. It has for generations." Something cold settled in Sophia's stomach as Blake reached inside his jacket and withdrew his checkbook. With practiced efficiency, he wrote out a check, tore it from the book, and slid it across the table. $50,000, he said flatly. "That should cover everything." Discreetly. Sophia stared at the check, understanding slowly dawning. "You want me to get an abortion. I want you to be practical. This isn't the right time for either of us. These are our children." "They're a cluster of cells at this point," Blake countered, his voice taking on the same tone he used when discussing business acquisitions. "And frankly, I'm not convinced they're even mine." Tears burned behind Sophia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "How dare you? I have never been with anyone else." Blake sighed, impatience edging into his tone. "Look, the check is more than generous. Use part of it to take a semester off if you need to recover. It's a clean solution." "Clean?" Sophia's voice rose. "There's nothing clean about abandoning your own children." His expression hardened. "Lower your voice. People are watching." "Let them watch," she hissed. "Let them see who Blake Thompson really is when the expensive suit comes off." Something shifted in Blake's eyes then, the last vestiges of the man she thought she knew disappearing entirely, replaced by cold calculation. "You are just a scholarship student who doesn't belong in my world," he said with cutting precision. "I was intrigued by your different perspective, but this," he gestured vaguely toward her stomach, "this is not part of my plan." Sophia sat perfectly still, his words slicing through her more painfully than any physical blow. "I thought you loved me." "I was entertained by you," Blake corrected. "There's a difference." With trembling fingers, Sophia picked up the check. For one terrible moment, she considered the life it could buy back, her career trajectory, her carefully planned future. Then, with deliberate movements, she tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths. "I don't want your money," she said, dropping the pieces onto his untouched plate. "And these children don't need a father who sees them as an inconvenience." Blake's face flushed with anger. "Don't be foolish. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking, more clearly than I have in 6 months." Sophia gathered her purse, prepared to leave with whatever dignity she could salvage. Blake grabbed her wrist. "If you walk away from this offer, there won't be another. Don't embarrass me by calling my family. You never were anything more than temporary entertainment between board meetings." Sophia wrenched her arm away. "And you were never the man I thought you were." As she stood, Blake delivered his final blow, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Those bastards will never carry my surname." The restaurant fell silent. Faces turned toward their table, some curious, others embarrassed, a few openly disapproving. Sophia straightened her spine, looked directly into Blake's eyes, and spoke with quiet dignity. "One day, you will regret every word you've said tonight." She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, but once outside, the cool spring air hit her tear-streaked face like a slap. She made it 3 blocks before her legs gave out, collapsing onto a bench overlooking the public garden. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then heavier, soaking through her carefully chosen dress. Sophia didn't move, letting the rain wash away her tears as reality settled over her like a weight. She was pregnant with triplets. The father had abandoned them. Her carefully constructed future had just imploded. In the months that followed, Sophia's life unraveled with brutal efficiency. Her student housing coordinator explained with practiced sympathy that family housing was limited and had a 2-year waiting list. "Perhaps other arrangements would be more suitable for your situation," the woman suggested, eyes flickering to Sophia's midsection. She found a tiny apartment in Dorchester, 1 bedroom with water stains on the ceiling and unreliable heat, but it was all she could afford. Packing her few possessions took less than a day, each item a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. Her supervisor at Goldman Sachs called her into his office the week after she began showing. "Sophia, your work has been exemplary, but we've noticed you seem distracted lately." "I'm pregnant," she said simply, "but it won't affect my performance." His discomfort was palpable. "The thing is, our clients expect a certain image from our associates. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if you took some time off." Translation: a visibly pregnant, unmarried Latina didn't fit the Goldman Sachs aesthetic. 3 days of desperate searching led her to a position as a cashier at CVS, irony of ironies, a pharmacy chain that prominently displayed Thompson Pharmaceuticals products. Every shift, she rang up medications with Blake's family name emblazoned across the packaging, each one a visceral reminder of his betrayal. The job barely covered rent. When her manager cut her hours, "You're moving too slowly, customers are complaining," Sophia took on night work digitizing medical records for a local hospital. When that still wasn't enough to cover prenatal care, she added weekend remote consulting for small businesses needing financial guidance. 3 jobs, all while carrying triplets. By her 7th month, her tiny frame was stretched to its limits. Her ankles swelled so severely she could no longer wear anything but the cheapest slip-on sneakers. Customers at CVS stared at her ringless finger, then at her prominent belly, judgment clear in their expressions. "Your situation is financially precarious for a multiple pregnancy," Dr. Klein warned during a checkup. "Have you considered applying for state assistance? WIC could help with nutrition, and Mass Health would cover your medical expenses." The suggestion stung. Her parents had prided themselves on never taking government assistance, even in their leanest years as new immigrants. But pride wouldn't feed 3 babies or pay for their medical care. 2 weeks later, fate delivered its cruelest coincidence. While shopping at Whole Foods, a rare splurge to buy the iron-rich foods her doctor recommended, Sophia literally bumped carts with Elizabeth Thompson, Blake's mother. Recognition was immediate and mutual. Elizabeth's gaze traveled from Sophia's face to her enormous belly, her expression transitioning from confusion to cold fury. "You," she said simply. "Mrs. Thompson," Sophia acknowledged, dignity intact despite her swollen ankles and second-hand maternity dress. "Blake told me a scholarship student might try to contact us with false claims." Elizabeth's voice carried the practiced disdain of old Boston money. "I see he wasn't exaggerating the situation." "False claims?" Sophia repeated, one hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "My son would never become involved with your type. Not seriously." Elizabeth's perfect makeup didn't shift as she delivered the insult. "Whatever arrangement you had was clearly misunderstood on your part." People were staring now, other shoppers pretending to examine organic produce while eavesdropping shamelessly. "These are your grandchildren," Sophia said quietly. 3 of them. Boys, according to the ultrasound. Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes. Curiosity? Doubt? Before hardening again. "If you contact any member of the Thompson family again, our lawyers will file harassment charges. Is that understood?" Without waiting for a response, she turned her cart and walked away, leaving Sophia standing alone in the produce section, witnessed by a dozen silent observers. In the public bathroom, locked in a stall, Sophia finally allowed herself to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her very core. When the tears finally subsided, she placed both hands on her belly, feeling the movement of the 3 lives within. "You'll never be humiliated like this again," she promised them. Never. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Sophia's labor began, 2 months premature. Alone in her apartment, she called a ride-share to take her to Massachusetts General Hospital, breathing through contractions while the driver nervously checked his rearview mirror. 22 hours later, she held 3 tiny, perfect boys in her arms for the first time. Ethan, Noah, and Liam, names she had chosen months ago, strong names that could belong anywhere, from boardrooms to laboratories. All 3 had Blake's startling blue eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez, will the father be joining us?" the nurse asked as she completed the birth certificates. "No," Sophia answered, looking down at her sons. "It's just us." That night, as her babies fought for strength in the NICU, Sophia borrowed a laptop from the hospital's Family Resource Center. With determination burning through her exhaustion, she completed the business plan she had abandoned months ago, a revolutionary model for low-cost pharmaceutical distribution. "You never were anything more than temporary entertainment between board meetings," Blake's words echoed in her mind as she typed. "Those bastards will never carry my surname," fueled each paragraph she wrote. By morning, she had completed the proposal and sent it to the Cambridge Innovation Lab, a startup incubator known for backing disruptive healthcare models. As the email sent, Sophia made a silent promise to her 3 tiny fighters in the NICU. When she finally collapsed into sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, laptop still open beside her, Sophia had no idea that the desperate email she had just sent would be the first step in building an empire that would, in 6 years, be worth more than the entire Thompson family fortune. When the desperate email she had just sent disappeared into the digital ether, Sophia had no idea it would become the first step in building an empire that would, in 6 years, be worth more than the entire Thompson family fortune. For now, all she could focus on was survival, hers and the 3 tiny lives depending on her. The hospital discharged Sophia 4 days after delivery, but her sons remained in the NICU, their miniature bodies fighting to develop lungs strong enough to breathe unassisted. Every morning, she packed her breast milk in labeled containers, caught the 5:45 a.m. bus from Dorchester, and arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital by 7 a.m. to sit beside their incubators, talking softly about the future they would build together. "You need to rest, Ms. Rodriguez," the night nurse admonished, finding Sophia asleep in the uncomfortable chair beside the incubators for the 3rd consecutive night. "They'll still be here tomorrow." "I can't afford to miss a moment," Sophia replied, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "Every day they know my voice matters." After 2 weeks of watching her children through plastic walls, Sophia faced the crushing reality of her housing situation. The landlord of her tiny Dorchester apartment had left a voicemail. "No babies. Lease says single occupancy only. You'll need to vacate by month's end." With trembling hands, she searched online listings at the hospital's family resource computer. Every affordable option required a credit check she couldn't pass or security deposits she couldn't afford. Places that might accept her situation were in neighborhoods where gunshots served as nightly lullabies. "Have you considered applying for transitional housing?" the hospital social worker suggested during a required consultation. "With premature triplets and your income level, you'd qualify for emergency assistance." Sophia's throat tightened. "My parents came to this country with nothing and never took handouts." "This isn't a handout," the social worker replied gently. "It's a safety net for extraordinary circumstances. Would your parents want their grandsons living somewhere unsafe?" That afternoon, Sophia completed the humiliating paperwork. Each box she checked: unemployed, single parent, no stable housing. Another blow to the self-image she'd cultivated as the success story, the scholarship student, the one who would make her immigrant parents proud. The day her sons were finally discharged, Sophia moved into a 2-bedroom unit in a state-subsidized apartment complex in Mattapan. The walls were institutional beige, the carpet worn thin from previous occupants, but it was clean and had a working kitchen. Most importantly, it accepted her housing voucher. With the babies finally home, reality crashed down with brutal force. 3 infants meant round-the-clock feedings, diaper changes that consumed entire paychecks, and a constant symphony of cries that made neighbors pound on the walls at 3 a.m. Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. Her former position at Goldman Sachs felt like a distant dream. When she called to inquire about the possibility of remote work, her supervisor's assistant claimed he was in meetings 3 consecutive times. The message was clear. The prestigious firm had no place for a single mother of triplets, especially one whose physical appearance now showed the strain of her circumstances. One Tuesday morning, with the babies finally asleep after a night of colic, Sophia spotted a now hiring sign in the window of the CVS pharmacy 3 blocks from her apartment. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, looked skeptically at Sophia's resume. "You're vastly overqualified," she said, eyebrow raised. "MIT economics? Goldman Sachs internship? Why would you want to work as a cashier?" Sophia swallowed her pride. "I have 3-month-old triplets. I need flexible hours and something close to home." The manager's expression softened slightly. "Triplets? God help you." She glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "Look, I shouldn't do this, but my daughter was a single mom too. I can offer you 30 hours a week, split between mornings and evenings, $7.50 an hour." The salary wouldn't cover diapers and formula, let alone rent after her housing voucher expired, but it was a start. "I'll take it." Her first day at CVS brought a painful irony she hadn't anticipated. While stocking shelves in the pharmaceutical section, Sophia found herself handling boxes emblazoned with the Thompson Pharmaceuticals logo. Heart medications priced at over $500 for a 30-day supply. Each package she placed on the shelf felt like handling a piece of Blake's betrayal. "Could you hurry with that order?" her supervisor called. "We need you on register too." For 8 hours, Sophia rang up customers, many of whom looked at her worn appearance with thinly veiled disdain. Her CVS uniform, a red polo shirt stretched tight across her still-recovering postpartum body, was a stark contrast to the tailored blazers and silk blouses that once filled her closet. A middle-aged woman purchasing expensive face cream looked pointedly at Sophia's ringless finger, then at the photo of 3 infants she'd taped to her register. "Triplets? My goodness, was that planned?" Sophia forced a customer service smile. "They're the best unplanned blessing I've ever received." The woman's pitying look followed Sophia through the remainder of her shift. That night, after putting the boys to bed in the second-hand cribs donated by a local church, Sophia opened her laptop, the one luxury she'd refused to pawn, and searched for additional income opportunities. Remote data entry positions paid pennies but could be done during the precious hours when all 3 babies slept. Online financial consulting for small businesses might leverage her education, even if the clients weren't the Fortune 500 companies she'd once envisioned advising. By the end of the week, Sophia had cobbled together 3 jobs: morning shifts at CVS, evening medical data entry for a local hospital, and weekend consulting for immigrant-owned businesses struggling with financial planning. The combined income barely covered her expenses, leaving nothing for savings or emergencies. Each night, she fell asleep at her kitchen table, head resting on spreadsheets, only to be awakened 2 hours later by hungry cries from the bedroom. The face that looked back from her bathroom mirror grew gaunt, dark circles a permanent fixture beneath her once bright eyes. "Your financial situation is precarious for a multiple pregnancy." Dr. Klein's words echoed in her mind during a particularly difficult night when Ethan's cough kept the entire household awake. Without insurance, a pediatrician visit would mean skipping utility payments that month. In the morning, swallowing the last remnants of her pride, Sophia applied for mass health insurance for the boys. Another form, another admission of defeat. As the babies grew, so did the challenges. At 6 months, all 3 showed signs of the developmental delays common in premature infants. The physical therapist recommended specialized equipment Sophia couldn't afford. The nutritionist suggested organic formulas that cost triple the standard brand. "Ms. Rodriguez, are you getting any support from the father?" the social worker asked during a home visit, noticing the threadbare furnishings and Sophia's increasingly exhausted appearance. "No," Sophia answered simply, bouncing Noah on one knee while feeding Liam with her free hand. Ethan played on a blanket nearby, grasping at toys Sophia had salvaged from thrift stores. "Have you pursued child support? With triplets, you're entitled to significant—" "There will be no child support," Sophia interrupted, her voice firm. "No court proceedings, no legal entanglements." The social worker frowned. "May I ask why? It could make a tremendous difference in your circumstances." Sophia looked at her sons, all three with Blake's piercing blue eyes. "Because some prices are too high, even for survival." What she couldn't explain was the visceral dread that filled her at the thought of Blake having any legal connection to her children. No amount of money could compensate for the risk of him appearing in their lives only to reject them again, or worse, to claim them as Thompson heirs if he ever discovered their exceptional intelligence, already evident in how quickly they processed their surroundings. One afternoon, while shopping for discounted groceries at the Whole Foods market, a rare indulgence justified by their day-old bread sales, Sophia turned a corner and came face to face with Elizabeth Thompson. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved, both frozen in mutual recognition. Elizabeth's gaze traveled from Sophia's face to the triplet stroller where three identical 7-month-old boys slept peacefully. Her perfectly composed expression faltered for a moment, recognition flickering in her eyes as she registered the unmistakable Thompson features reflected in the babies' faces. "My son never got involved with your kind," Elizabeth said coldly, but her voice lacked the conviction of their previous encounter. Sophia straightened her shoulders, summoning dignity despite her worn coat and discount store jeans. "Your grandchildren are growing beautifully, Mrs. Thompson. They're already showing signs of exceptional intelligence." Elizabeth's hand tightened on her shopping cart. "Don't you dare approach our family. Blake is engaged to Catherine Winthrop. Their wedding is next spring." The information was a knife twist Sophia hadn't anticipated. Blake had moved on completely, erasing her, erasing their children as if they had never existed. "Congratulations to the happy couple," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the pain lancing through her chest. "I hope they're very happy together." She turned the stroller and walked away, her back straight, refusing to give Elizabeth the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. In the public restroom, Sophia locked herself in a stall and allowed silent tears to fall for exactly 60 seconds, all the time she could afford to waste on Blake Thompson and his cold-hearted family. When the minute passed, she wiped her face, straightened her clothes, and emerged to face the world again. That night, after the boys were asleep, Sophia sat in the dim light of her kitchen table and made a decision. Opening her laptop, she pulled up the document she'd been working on sporadically between shifts and midnight feedings. A comprehensive business plan for a pharmaceutical distribution model that would make essential medications accessible to those who couldn't afford Thompson Pharmaceuticals' inflated prices. "Your situation is precarious," every doctor had told her. "Not our target demographic," every landlord had implied. "A temporary entertainment," Blake had dismissed her. Each rejection became fuel for the fire building inside her. Every system that had failed her, healthcare, housing, education, employment, was connected to the same fundamental inequity. And she, with her unique perspective straddling both worlds, could see the pressure points where change was possible. For 3 consecutive nights, Sophia worked through the midnight hours, refining her model while her sons slept. On the 4th morning, dark circles shadowing her eyes, she emailed her completed proposal to 3 pharmaceutical startup incubators and 5 social impact investors. Within the week, she received a response from Cambridge Innovation Labs. "Your distribution model presents an intriguing challenge to conventional pharmaceutical pricing structures. We would like to discuss potential incubation." As she read the email during her lunch break at CVS, surrounded by Thompson Pharmaceuticals products she could barely afford to purchase with her employee discount, Sophia didn't realize she was looking at the first building block of what would become her empire. In the solitude of her subsidized apartment, while working on a revolutionary pharmaceutical distribution model that experts would dismiss as too idealistic, Sophia couldn't imagine she was laying the foundation for an empire that would one day make Thompson Pharmaceuticals look obsolete. In the solitude of her subsidized apartment, while working on a revolutionary pharmaceutical distribution model that experts would dismiss as too idealistic, Sophia couldn't imagine she was laying the foundation for an empire that would one day make Thompson Pharmaceuticals look obsolete. All she knew was that she needed to find a way forward, for herself and for the 3 tiny hearts that depended on her. At 37 weeks pregnant, Sophia felt the first contraction while organizing inventory shelves at CVS. The sharp pain radiated across her lower back, causing her to drop a box of Thompson Pharmaceuticals' overpriced blood pressure medication. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even in this moment, Blake's family business was there to witness her vulnerability. "You okay, Rodriguez?" her supervisor called, noticing her frozen posture. "Fine," she managed, straightening slowly as another contraction gripped her. "Just need a minute." In the employee restroom, Sophia timed the contractions on her phone, still 15 minutes apart. She had at least finished her shift before calling a rideshare service she couldn't afford, the driver eyeing her nervously in the rearview mirror. "First baby?" he asked, accelerating through a yellow light. "First 3, Sophia corrected, breathing through another contraction. The driver's eyes widened in the mirror. "Triplets? Damn, your husband must be freaking out." Sophia turned to look out the window, one hand protectively cradling her enormous belly. "No husband, just me." The hospital admission process was a blur of forms and questions. A nurse with kind eyes looked up from the clipboard. "The father of the babies? Should we call him?" "There won't be anyone coming," Sophia replied with practiced neutrality, having anticipated this question for months. The labor and delivery floor buzzed with activity. Other mothers surrounded by partners, parents, siblings celebrating new life. Sophia was wheeled to a corner room where the emptiness of the additional chairs seemed to mock her solitude. 22 hours. 22 hours of pain unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. Waves of agony that crashed through her body while monitors beeped warnings about the baby's decreasing heart rates. Through it all, she had only one consistent presence. Nurse Carmen, a middle-aged Latina who held her hand during the worst contractions. "You are stronger than you know," Carmen whispered in Spanish as Sophia cried out during a particularly vicious contraction. "Your children will know this strength." When the obstetrician finally announced that cesarean delivery was necessary, Sophia felt only relief. The bright lights of the operating room blinded her momentarily as she was transferred to the surgical table. "I'm scared," she admitted to Carmen, who had insisted on staying with her. "All mothers are scared," the nurse replied, squeezing her hand. "But few have your courage." Ethan came first. 5 pounds, 2 ounces of wrinkled humanity with a shock of dark hair and a weak, mewling cry that tore at Sophia's heart. "Baby A is here," the doctor announced. "Looks good, considering the prematurity." Noah followed 2 minutes later, slightly smaller than his brother but with stronger lungs that announced his arrival with impressive volume. Liam, the smallest at 4 pounds 7 ounces, emerged last with a quiet determination that would later define his personality. 3 healthy boys, the pediatrician announced. They'll need NICU time, but their initial assessments are promising. Sophia caught only glimpses of her sons before they were whisked away, 3 tiny bundles racing toward incubators and monitors that would support their premature bodies. "Can I see them? Please, before they go," she begged, struggling against the effects of anesthesia. A nurse briefly held each swaddled infant near her face. Through her exhaustion, Sophia noticed one startling detail that made her heart constrict. All three boys had Blake's unmistakable blue eyes. Hours later, when she could finally sit upright in a wheelchair, Sophia was taken to the NICU. The room hummed with machinery keeping vulnerable newborns alive. In one corner, three identical incubators stood side by side, each containing a miniature version of the man who had abandoned them. "They're fighters," the NICU nurse assured her, "especially for 32-weekers. Sophia stared at the tubes and wires connected to her sons, overwhelmed by love and terror in equal measure. "When can I hold them? The smallest one isn't quite stable enough, but you can do kangaroo care with the other two tomorrow if their stats remain good." The next afternoon, seated in a rocking chair between two incubators, Sophia experienced the moment she'd imagined differently for 9 months, holding her children for the first time. The NICU nurse placed Ethan against her chest, skin to skin, then carefully positioned Noah on her other side. "Support their heads," the nurse instructed unnecessarily. Sophia's arms had already cradled protectively around her sons. Looking down at their tiny faces, so vulnerable, so perfect, Sophia was overcome. These were her children, hers alone. Whatever dreams she'd harbored about co-parenting with Blake had evaporated months ago, but the reality of single motherhood hit her fully in this moment. "Hello, my loves," she whispered, tears falling onto their hospital caps. "I'm your mama, and I promise you'll never need anyone else." When Liam was finally stable enough to join his brothers for kangaroo care the following day, Sophia held all three against her chest simultaneously. The weight of them together, perhaps 8 pounds of combined humanity, felt both impossibly light and enormously heavy with responsibility. Looking into their identical blue eyes, Blake's eyes, Sophia made a silent vow that crystallized into words as she spoke to them. "You will never need the Thompson surname to be extraordinary," she promised, kissing each tiny forehead. "And one day, he will regret every word he said about us." That night, unable to sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside the incubators, Sophia borrowed a laptop from the Family Resource Center. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she opened the half-finished business plan she'd been working on before bed rest had derailed her efforts. "A New Model for Essential Medication Distribution," read the title. Below it lay the framework for a system that would bypass traditional pharmaceutical pricing structures, making life-saving medications accessible to those who needed them most. Professors had dismissed the concept as idealistic and commercially unviable. Blake himself had once called it naive during a dinner conversation, explaining patronizingly that pharmaceutical pricing was complex and necessary to fund research. But Sophia saw something they didn't, a gap in the market that was also a moral imperative. With fingers flying across the keyboard, she refined financial projections until dawn light streaked through the NICU windows. When a nurse arrived to check the baby's vitals, she found Sophia asleep over the keyboard, a completed business proposal glowing on the screen. While the triplets fought for strength in the NICU, Sophia fought her own battle, against exhaustion, against the system, against the ghost of Blake's dismissal that haunted her quietest moments. Between feeding schedules and medical consultations, she polished her proposal, drawing on everything she'd learned at MIT and during her brief time at Goldman Sachs. "Ms. Rodriguez, you should rest," the day nurse admonished, finding Sophia working on spreadsheets while pumping breast milk for the 3rd time that day. "I'll rest when my boys come home," she replied, not looking up from the screen. On the evening before the triplets' scheduled discharge, Sophia sat in the NICU's family room, triple-checking the email she was about to send. The address belonged to Cambridge Innovation Lab, an incubator known for backing disruptive healthcare startups. Her finger hovered over the send button, doubt momentarily paralyzing her. "You're just a scholarship student who doesn't belong in my world," Blake's voice echoed in her memory. Sophia closed her eyes, remembering her parents crossing the border with nothing but hope and determination. Remembering her own crossed borders, From public school in a rough neighborhood to the hallowed halls of MIT, from a scholarship student to a Goldman Sachs intern, from a woman in love to an abandoned mother, she pressed send. The response came faster than she'd anticipated, a notification chiming on her borrowed laptop just past midnight as she sat between the boys' incubators, watching their chests rise and fall in synchronous rhythm. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, your proposal presents an intriguing challenge to traditional pharmaceutical distribution models. While skeptical of some financial projections, we see potential in your core premise. Cambridge Innovation Lab would like to invite you for an initial discussion next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Regards, Dr. Elaine Winters, Director, Healthcare Innovations. Sophia read the email 3 times, disbelief gradually giving way to a tentative hope. A foot in the door, a possibility. The following morning brought both triumph and terror. The triplets were coming home. After weeks in the NICU, all 3 had reached the minimum weight requirements and could maintain their body temperatures. The discharge process was overwhelming. Medications, feeding schedules, follow-up appointments, warning signs to watch for. Remember, they're still vulnerable to infection, the discharge nurse cautioned, demonstrating proper techniques for everything from temperature taking to umbilical cord care. Sophia nodded, mentally adding these instructions to the growing list of responsibilities crushing down on her. The tiny apartment waiting for them suddenly seemed woefully inadequate, despite her frantic preparations during stolen hours away from the hospital. "Do you have someone to help you at home?" the nurse asked, noticing Sophia's overwhelmed expression. "I'll manage," she replied, the same answer she'd given to every similar question over the past weeks. Loading 3 infant carriers into the taxi felt like an impossible logistical challenge. Once home, the reality of caring for premature triplets alone hit with full force. The first night, Sophia managed exactly 47 minutes of broken sleep between feedings, diaper changes, and reassuring herself that all 3 babies were still breathing. By morning, when the home health nurse arrived for the first follow-up, Sophia's eyes were red-rimmed, her hair unwashed, her MIT sweatshirt stained with spit-up from all 3 boys. "How are you managing?" the nurse asked, concerned. "Fine," Sophia lied, bouncing a fussing Liam while Ethan and Noah miraculously slept. After checking all 3 babies, the nurse pulled Sophia aside. "You need help. There are support services." "I have a job interview on Tuesday," Sophia interrupted. "A real opportunity. I just need to find someone to watch them for 2 hours." The nurse looked skeptical but offered a solution. "My daughter babysits for medical appointments. She has experience with multiples." With childcare arranged and her one presentable maternity dress ironed, Sophia prepared for the Cambridge Innovation Lab interview while simultaneously caring for 3 newborns. The night before, she rehearsed her presentation while walking endless circles in the tiny living room, soothing a colicky Ethan. "We can create a new distribution pathway that bypasses traditional markup structures," she practiced, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Essential medications delivered at cost plus 15%, not the current 300% markups." The morning of the interview, disaster struck. The babysitter called with a fever, leaving Sophia with an impossible choice: miss this opportunity or bring 3 2-week-old premature infants to a professional meeting. In the end, there was no choice at all. 90 minutes later, Sophia wheeled a triple stroller through the doors of Cambridge Innovation Lab, diaper bag slung over her shoulder, wearing the only clean clothes she could find, black maternity pants and a button-down shirt for easy nursing access. Dr. Winters' expression when Sophia entered the conference room with 3 sleeping infants was priceless, a mixture of shock, confusion, and reluctant admiration. "I apologize for the unexpected guests," Sophia said, positioning the stroller where she could rock it with 1 foot while presenting. "My childcare arrangements fell through." "These are all yours?" Dr. Winters asked, peering at the identical faces. "Yes. They're 2 weeks old, born 7 weeks premature." Sophia unfolded her presentation materials with practiced efficiency. "Shall we begin?" For the next hour, Sophia delivered the most important presentation of her life while simultaneously monitoring 3 newborns. When Noah woke hungry midway through financial projections, she continued speaking while discreetly adjusting her nursing cover. When Liam needed a diaper change during questions about scalability, she handled it without breaking her explanation of distribution logistics. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Winters shook her head in amazement. "Ms. Rodriguez, I've seen countless pitches, but never one delivered while caring for triplets. If you can manage this level of multitasking, perhaps your ambitious projections aren't so unrealistic after all." On the bus ride home, all 3 babies miraculously sleeping, Sophia allowed herself the first real smile in months. The path forward remained impossibly steep, but for the first time since Blake's betrayal, she could see beyond survival to something resembling a future. When she clicked send on that desperate proposal, exhausted between NICU visits and pharmacy shifts, Sophia had no idea that email would be the first step in building a company that, in 6 years, would be worth more than the entire Thompson empire. When she clicked send on that desperate proposal, exhausted between NICU visits and pharmacy shifts, Sophia had no idea that email would be the first step in building a company that, in 6 years, would be worth more than the entire Thompson empire. Life rarely followed such neat narrative arcs, and yet sometimes determination created its own miracles. Exactly 1 year after the birth of the triplets, Sophia stood outside the glass doors of Cambridge Innovation Lab, the boys strapped into their triple stroller. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reread the email that had arrived 3 days earlier. "Your distribution model has been accepted for incubation. Please come to discuss terms and office allocation." "This is it, Miss Amores," she whispered to her sleeping sons. "Everything changes today." The receptionist's eyes widened at the sight of 3 identical 1-year-olds, but she maintained professional composure. "Dr. Winters is expecting you, Ms. Rodriguez, though she didn't mention you'd be bringing company." "My children go where I go," Sophia replied simply, navigating the stroller through the narrow doorway. Dr. Elaine Winters, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes, surveyed the entire package. Determined young woman, 3 babies, and revolutionary pharmaceutical distribution model with clinical interest. "Your proposal was compelling," she said without preamble. "Your execution plan is ambitious. The question is whether you can realistically build this while raising 3 children alone." Sophia met her gaze steadily. "With respect, Dr. Winters, raising these 3 children is precisely why I will succeed. I have more motivation than any other founder in your portfolio." Dr. Winters' expression remained impassive. "Show me." The interview lasted 2 hours. Ethan woke hungry midway through, forcing Sophia to demonstrate her ability to breastfeed while simultaneously explaining margin calculations. Noah had a diaper blowout just as she reached her scaling projections. Liam began fussing during the discussion of regulatory hurdles. Through it all, Sophia never lost her place in the presentation, handling each interruption with practiced efficiency before returning seamlessly to complex financial models. "Most founders can't maintain focus when their phone buzzes," Dr. Winters observed, watching Sophia change Noah with one hand while pointing to distribution figures with the other. "You've just outlined a 5-year market penetration strategy while handling 3 simultaneous crises." For the first time, a hint of approval crossed the older woman's face. "Your assigned space will be limited, 1 desk, 2 chairs, and shared conference rooms. The stipend is $1,800 monthly for the first 6 months. If certain benchmarks are met, additional funding becomes available." $1,800 wasn't enough to live on, especially with 3 growing children, but it was a start, a foundation upon which Sophia could build. "I'll need to keep my pharmacy shifts temporarily," she said, "and I'll need to bring my sons with me until I can afford childcare." Dr. Winters frowned. "This is a professional environment, Ms. Rodriguez." "And they are exceptionally well behaved," Sophia countered. "I'll bring a playpen, noise-canceling headphones for conference calls, and I'll work through their nap times." This is non-negotiable." A tense silence stretched between them before Dr. Winters finally nodded. "1-month trial period. If they disrupt other founders, we'll need to reconsider." 2 days later, Sophia arranged her meager belongings on the small desk in her assigned corner of the open-plan incubator space. A donated pack-and-play served as both playpen and nap area for the boys, positioned strategically beside her desk. The other founders, mostly young men with degrees from prestigious universities, watched with poorly disguised skepticism as she established her unconventional workspace. "Daycare would be cheaper than giving up equity," one whispered to another, loud enough for Sophia to hear. She pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the list of potential team members she'd compiled during late-night research sessions. Traditional pharmaceutical experience wasn't her priority. She needed people who understood what it meant to be overlooked by the system. Her first interview was with Dr. Eleanor White, a 67-year-old biochemist whose resume showed an impressive research career at major pharmaceutical companies until 7 years earlier, when the trail suddenly went cold. "You haven't published or worked in the industry since 2010, Sophia noted, bouncing Ethan on her knee while Liam and Noah napped in the playpen. Dr. White's gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her posture military straight despite her age. "The industry decided I was obsolete at 60, too expensive to keep, too set in my ways for innovation." Bitterness tinged her words. "I've been teaching high school chemistry since then." Sophia studied the older woman carefully. "The industry was wrong." "Yes," Dr. White replied simply. "They were." "I can't pay market rate," Sophia admitted. "Not yet, but I can offer equity and the chance to prove them wrong." Dr. White glanced at the sleeping babies, then at the ambitious distribution models pinned to Sophia's small bulletin board. "The industry discarded me for being obsolete. Let's prove them wrong." Her second recruit came through a connection at her neighborhood bodega. Miguel Suarez, a 45-year-old Colombian immigrant with 3 engineering degrees from Bogotá, had spent 15 years in America working as a warehouse manager despite his expertise in logistics systems. "Your resume says you developed a supply chain optimization protocol for pharmaceutical cold storage," Sophia said during their interview in a corner cafe because the incubator's conference rooms were booked. Miguel nodded, his accent thicker than his application had suggested. "I presented it to my employers at 3 different companies. None believed it would work because of your accent," Sophia finished, "not because of your ideas." His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with determination. 15 years in this country, and you are the first person to see past how I sound to hear what I'm saying." Sophia shifted Noah to her other arm. "I need someone who understands both the technical aspects of pharmaceutical distribution and the real-world barriers to implementation. Someone who knows how to navigate systems designed to exclude." "Like being a Colombian engineer with 3 degrees working in a warehouse for minimum wage?" Miguel asked with a wry smile. "Exactly like that," Sophia confirmed. "I can offer minimal salary but significant equity, and the guarantee that your ideas will be heard." With Dr. White's pharmaceutical expertise and Miguel's logistics brilliance, Sophia had the beginnings of a real team. Their tiny corner of the incubator hummed with activity, Dr. White analyzing generic formulations they could legally produce, Miguel designing distribution systems that bypassed traditional markup structures, and Sophia working on financial models while simultaneously managing 3 increasingly mobile toddlers. Nights were a brutal extension of days. After putting the boys to bed in their shared bedroom of her subsidized apartment, Sophia spread financial projections across her kitchen table, working until her vision blurred. Some mornings, the triplets would find her asleep among spreadsheets, pens still in hand, the imprint of calculator keys on her cheek. "You need proper childcare," Dr. White observed bluntly, finding Sophia attempting to run a conference call while all 3 boys had simultaneous meltdowns during a growth spurt. "You can't build a company this way." "Childcare for triplets costs more than our current operating budget," Sophia replied, expertly soothing Liam while signaling to Miguel to handle the other two. "We adapt." And adapt they did. The trio established an unconventional rhythm. Miguel taught himself to type one-handed so he could hold a baby with the other. Dr. White discovered her stern voice that had intimidated generations of students was remarkably effective at capturing toddler attention during crucial moments. Sophia mastered the art of nursing twins while reviewing legal documents and entertaining the third with her free hand. Their first breakthrough came 4 months into incubation, when Sophia secured meetings with 3 community health clinics serving immigrant populations in East Boston. These communities couldn't afford Thompson Pharmaceuticals insulin at $500 per vial, but they might afford the Rodriguez model at 70% less. "How can you possibly deliver at these prices?" asked Dr. Patel, director of the largest clinic, skepticism evident in his expression. "By eliminating 6 layers of markup," Sophia explained while the triplets napped in their stroller beside her, "and by accepting lower profit margins than companies like Thompson consider acceptable." "Thompson operates on 80% margins," Dr. Patel noted. "You're proposing 20%. "I'm proposing sustainability over greed," Sophia corrected. "Which do your patients need more?" By the end of the week, all 3 clinics had signed preliminary agreements to purchase medications through Rodriguez Biotech's distribution system, once they actually had medications to distribute. This small victory caught the attention of Robert Chen, a Silicon Valley angel investor visiting Cambridge Innovation Lab to scout new technologies. He had not planned to visit the pharmaceutical section of the incubator, considering it too regulated and slow-moving for his investment strategy, but the unusual sight of triplet toddlers playing beside a whiteboard covered in distribution models piqued his curiosity. "Interesting childcare solution," he commented, approaching Sophia's desk. She looked up from her laptop where she'd been simultaneously nursing Ethan while finalizing contract language. Not a solution, a necessity. Instead of being put off by her directness, Chen seemed intrigued. "Walk me through what you're building here." For the next 30 minutes, Sophia delivered what would later become known as the nursing pitch, a comprehensive overview of Rodriguez Biotech's revolutionary distribution model delivered while feeding one child, keeping another occupied with educational flashcards, and periodically checking the third who was napping nearby. "I came to see your business model," Chen said when she finished. "I found something much more compelling, an example of pure determination. You're nursing twins while explaining complex pharmaceutical distribution channels without missing a beat." He glanced at her financial projections. "Your margins are thin." "My purpose isn't," Sophia countered. Chen studied her for a long moment, then pulled out his card. "I'm having dinner with some friends who might be interested in what you're building. Call me tomorrow." 2 weeks later, Sophia stood before 8 potential investors in the incubator's largest conference room wearing her only professional outfit, a navy blazer from a consignment shop paired with black pants carefully mended where the hem had come loose. The contrast between her worn appearance and the immaculate suits of the venture capitalists was stark, but her presentation was flawless. Traditional pharmaceutical companies operate on a model designed to extract maximum profit from desperate consumers, she explained. Rodriguez Biotech disrupts this by eliminating unnecessary middlemen and accepting reasonable rather than extortionate margins. These communities can't afford $500 per medication. We offer it for $75 while still maintaining profitability. This isn't charity, it's sustainable business with social impact. The questions were brutal, challenging every assumption in her model. Sophia answered each without hesitation, her composure never faltering even when one investor suggested her maternal responsibilities would prevent proper company scaling. "My maternal responsibilities are precisely why this company will succeed," she replied evenly. "I understand what's at stake when medications are priced beyond reach. Do you?" 3 days later, Robert Chen called with news that would change everything. "My partners are in. $5 million initial funding, with potential for $15 million in Series A if you hit benchmarks." That night, after signing preliminary paperwork that would transform Rodriguez Biotech from concept to reality, Sophia and her tiny team gathered in her apartment for a modest celebration. Miguel brought cheap champagne while Dr. White supplied paper cups and a homemade cake. The triplets, now walking unsteadily, participated by smearing frosting across their identical faces. "To Rodriguez Biotech," Miguel toasted, raising his paper cup, "and to proving that the world was wrong about all of us." As they celebrated, Sophia's phone buzzed with a news alert. Blake Thompson named CEO of Thompson Pharmaceuticals following father's retirement. The accompanying photo showed Blake in an impeccable suit, the epitome of corporate success, standing beside his beaming parents at a lavish press conference. Sophia silently set her phone face down on the table, her expression betraying nothing as she turned back to her team, her real family, who had believed in her when no one else would. When she signed her first distribution contract, with hands that still showed calluses from her days as a cleaner, Sophia didn't know that within 5 years she would be negotiating 9-figure acquisitions that would shake the foundations of the Thompson empire. When she signed her first distribution contract, with hands that still showed calluses from her days as a cleaner, Sophia didn't know that within 5 years she would be negotiating 9-figure acquisitions that would shake the foundations of the Thompson empire. Yet here she was, 3 years after the birth of her sons, standing in the gleaming headquarters of Rodriguez Biotech, reviewing quarterly projections that exceeded even the most optimistic investor expectations. "The Series B funding is secured," announced Miguel, now Chief Operations Officer, entering Sophia's glass-walled office with a tablet displaying the final numbers. $50 million at a $400 million valuation. Sophia glanced at the 3-year-old boys playing in the designated children's area visible through her office window, a space she had insisted on when designing their first real headquarters. "That's double what we projected last quarter." "That's what happens when you create a generic version of Thompson's best-selling heart medication and sell it for 90% less, Dr. White said, joining them with a stack of lab reports. "The Thompson cardiac drug costs patients $5,000 monthly. Ours costs $200. We're not just disrupting their market, we're obliterating it." Sophia's phone buzzed with another congratulatory message from Robert Chen, whose initial $5 million investment now looked like the bargain of the century. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. 3 years ago, she had been a single mother struggling to feed her children while working 3 jobs. Now she was CEO of the fastest-growing pharmaceutical company in the country. The transformation of Rodriguez Biotech from desperate concept to industry disruptor had been nothing short of remarkable. With the initial funding secured, Sophia had assembled a team of scientists, many of whom had been discarded by traditional pharmaceutical companies for being too old, too foreign, or too focused on patient outcomes instead of profit margins. Their first breakthrough came 8 months after funding, when they successfully recreated the formula for Thompson's blockbuster heart medication without violating patents. By focusing on a slightly different delivery mechanism, they created a therapeutically identical product that could be legally manufactured and distributed at a fraction of the cost. "This is the medication my father needed," Sophia had explained during their first delivery to a community clinic in East Boston. "The one he couldn't afford because companies like Thompson put profit before lives." The clinic director, a woman who had spent decades watching patients ration medications or choose between medicine and food, had tears in her eyes as she signed the delivery confirmation. "Do you know how many lives this will save?" That first delivery had led to others. Dozens, then hundreds of clinics across Massachusetts signed contracts with Rodriguez Biotech. Healthcare providers who had been fighting the pharmaceutical industry's predatory pricing for years suddenly found an ally with both moral purpose and business acumen. Now, 3 years after the triplets' birth, Rodriguez Biotech occupied 3 floors of a Cambridge office building. Their laboratories, headed by Dr. White and staffed with scientists who shared their mission, developed generic versions of essential medications. Their distribution network, designed by Miguel, bypassed traditional channels that added layer upon layer of markup. Most importantly, their impact was measurable not just in profit margins but in lives improved. Community health centers reported fewer hospitalizations for conditions that had previously gone untreated due to medication costs. Patients who had been forced to choose between rent and prescriptions now had access to affordable alternatives. "The cardiology department at Mass General wants to meet," Miguel reported, scrolling through his emails. "They say patient compliance with heart medication regimens has increased 70% since we entered the market." Sophia nodded, watching her sons through the glass wall. Ethan, always the leader, was organizing blocks into elaborate patterns while instructing his brothers. Noah, quieter and more methodical, was absorbed in a picture book about ocean creatures, his finger tracing each image with intense concentration. Liam, the most inquisitive, was disassembling a toy car to examine its inner workings. At 3 years old, all three already showed signs of exceptional intelligence. They had begun reading at 2, could count to 100 in both English and Spanish, and asked questions that sometimes left even their scientifically minded caregivers searching for answers. "Mommy, why is the sky blue but space is black if they're the same place?" Liam had asked that morning over breakfast, causing Sophia to reach for her phone to Google the scientific explanation. Their identical blue eyes, the only physical trait they had inherited from Blake, seemed to absorb everything around them with unusual intensity. Sophia sometimes caught glimpses of their father in the way Ethan's eyebrow raised when skeptical, or how Noah's forehead creased in concentration, but their spirits were entirely their own. "Dr. Rodriguez?" Her assistant knocked lightly on the doorframe. "The laboratory team is ready for the presentation on the diabetes medication." Sophia nodded, collecting her tablet. "Ask Marta to watch the boys for an hour. I'll be in the main conference room." The presentation was another triumph. Rodriguez Biotech had successfully developed a generic insulin that could be produced for 1/10 the cost of Thompson's version. The company was now poised to enter the diabetes medication market, potentially saving millions of patients from the financial devastation of insulin dependency. "When can we begin production?" Sophia asked after the lead scientist concluded his presentation. "Next month, if the final stability tests confirm what we're seeing. We'll be able to supply every community clinic in New England by the end of Q3. As the meeting concluded, Sophia's phone buzzed with a news alert. Thompson Pharmaceuticals stock falls 15% amid generic competition concerns. She dismissed the notification without comment, though a small part of her noted the irony. Blake's company, the empire he had chosen over her and their children, was now feeling the impact of her determination. Later that afternoon, as Sophia worked on quarterly projections, she noticed Ethan studying her intently from the playpen in her office. His blue eyes, so like his father's, focused with unusual concentration. "What are you thinking about, mi amor?" she asked, setting aside her work. "Why do we live in an apartment when you have a big office?" he asked, his 3-year-old logic cutting straight to a question Sophia hadn't anticipated. Despite Rodriguez Biotech's success, Sophia had maintained relatively modest living arrangements. They had moved from the subsidized housing to a comfortable but not luxurious 3-bedroom apartment in Cambridge. While she could now afford virtually any home in Boston, she had deliberately avoided the trappings of wealth that might separate her children from understanding the real world. "Because our home is perfect for us," she answered carefully. "And the company's money is for helping people get medicine they need." Ethan considered this with the seriousness only a 3-year-old could muster before nodding and returning to his blocks. Sophia watched him for a moment, wondering how to balance shielding her sons from the truth about their father while preparing them for eventually learning it. That evening, after tucking the boys into their beds, each with their own space now, though they often migrated to a single bed during the night, Sophia received an unexpected call from a journalist at Fortune magazine. "Dr. Rodriguez, we'd like to feature you in our Disruptors issue," the journalist explained. Your company's approach to pharmaceutical pricing is revolutionizing the industry. Sophia hesitated. She had deliberately maintained a low profile, avoiding industry events and declining previous interview requests. Part of this was strategic, focusing on building rather than promoting. But there was also the unspoken concern about Blake potentially recognizing her if her image became too public. "I prefer to let our work speak for itself," she began. "With respect, Dr. Rodriguez, your work is speaking so loudly that the entire industry is listening." Thompson Pharmaceuticals' CEO specifically mentioned irresponsible pricing from upstart companies in his last earnings call. People want to know who's behind the company making Blake Thompson nervous. The mention of Blake's name sent an unexpected jolt through Sophia. She had trained herself not to react to news about him, to view Thompson Pharmaceuticals as simply another competitor rather than the company run by the man who had abandoned her and their children. After considering the journalist's request, Sophia agreed to a limited interview, no personal questions, no photos of her children, and final approval on the article. It was time to step out of the shadows, even if that meant potentially putting herself on Blake's radar. The Fortune interview took place in Rodriguez Biotech's modest boardroom. The journalist, clearly expecting more ostentatious surroundings, seemed surprised by the functional but not luxurious space. "Most pharmaceutical CEOs I interview have original artwork and views of the harbor," she commented, setting up her recorder. "I prefer to invest in research rather than decor," Sophia replied simply. Throughout the interview, Sophia remained focused on the company's mission and achievements, deflecting questions about her personal journey. When the journalist inevitably asked about competition with industry giants like Thompson, Sophia maintained professional detachment. "Our goal isn't to compete with any specific company," she explained. "It's to prove that essential medications can be both accessible and profitable. The current model is fundamentally flawed, designed to extract maximum payment from people who often must choose between medication and food." As the interview concluded, the journalist asked the question that would later become the article's most quoted line. "How do you sleep at night knowing you're saving lives while your competitors are filling their pockets?" Sophia paused, then answered with quiet intensity. "I wonder how they sleep doing the opposite." 3 weeks later, when the Fortune issue hit newsstands with Sophia on the cover as the biotech revolutionary, the article sent shockwaves through the pharmaceutical industry. Her quote about sleep became a rallying cry for healthcare advocates and a thorn in the side of traditional pharmaceutical executives. What Sophia didn't know was that Blake Thompson was reading that same article in his luxurious office overlooking Boston Harbor, frowning at the photograph of the woman challenging his company's business model. Though the years and success had changed her appearance, something about her eyes nagged at his memory, a vague familiarity he couldn't quite place. The boys were asleep when Sophia finally returned home that evening. She moved quietly through their apartment, checking on each child, Noah clutching his favorite book even in sleep, Liam surrounded by disassembled toys, Ethan sleeping with the precise organization that characterized everything he did. Sitting at her kitchen table, she opened the Fortune magazine that her assistant had purchased. Seeing herself on the cover, described as the woman rewriting the rules of pharmaceutical pricing, brought a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what she had built, certainly. Satisfaction at proving Blake's dismissal wrong, but also apprehension about the increased visibility. She traced her finger over the quote highlighted beside her image. "I wonder how they sleep doing the opposite." The words weren't directed specifically at Blake. She hadn't mentioned him or their history to the journalist, but they carried the weight of their shared past nonetheless. While she placed the magazine in a drawer rather than displaying it prominently, Sophia didn't realize that the publication with her photo on the cover was sitting on Blake Thompson's desk, the man who had called her dispensable now seeing his empire threatened by a competitor whose face seemed vaguely familiar. While Blake Thompson was staring at Sophia's photograph in Fortune magazine trying to place where he might have seen her before, she was making decisions that would irrevocably alter both their futures. 5 years had passed since the birth of the triplets, and Rodriguez Biotech had evolved from a struggling startup into a pharmaceutical powerhouse that was reshaping the industry. The Sovereign Wealth Fund of Abu Dhabi is prepared to lead your Series C round, announced Marcus Greenfield, Sophia's investment banker, as they sat in her spacious yet deliberately understated office. They're valuing Rodriguez Biotech at $2.5 billion. Sophia maintained her composure, though inwardly she marveled at the figure. From a desperate single mother with $50 in her bank account to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company in 5 years, the trajectory was almost unbelievable. "And the conditions?" she asked, ever pragmatic. "Standard governance provisions, 2 board seats, and they want you locked in as CEO for a minimum of 5 years. Marcus shuffled his papers. "They're particularly impressed with your cardiac medication program. Apparently, the Crown Prince's father uses your generic version instead of Thompson's original, despite being able to afford either." At the mention of Thompson Pharmaceuticals, Sophia's attention shifted to the Wall Street Journal open on her tablet. The headline jumped out at her. "Thompson Pharmaceuticals faces 30% stock drop following price gouging scandal." "Send me the term sheet," she told Marcus. "I'll review it with the board tomorrow." After he left, Sophia remained at her desk, studying the article about Thompson Pharmaceuticals. Blake had steered the company into increasingly aggressive pricing strategies, culminating in a 600% increase on a leukemia medication. The backlash had been swift and severe: congressional hearings, patient protests, and now a significant stock plunge. An idea began forming in her mind, so audacious she almost dismissed it immediately. She called her financial advisor, Joshua Kleinman. "Josh, what would it take to purchase shares in Thompson Pharmaceuticals? Quietly, through shell companies." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "Are you considering what I think you're considering?" "Just exploring options," Sophia replied carefully. "Their stock has dropped 30%. It might be strategically valuable to have a position." "It would be complex but doable," Josh answered. "We'd need to create several investment vehicles to mask the true purchaser. May I ask why you'd want ownership in a company whose business model you're actively disrupting?" Sophia gazed through her office window to where her sons were attending their kindergarten graduation celebration in the company's child care center. At 5 years old, the boys were tall for their age, with Sophia's dark hair and Blake's piercing blue eyes. They wore matching navy blazers with tiny boutonnieres, Sophia's concession to the formal occasion. "Let's just say I'm interested in having a voice in how essential medications are priced," she answered, though the truth was far more complex. Later that afternoon, Sophia slipped away from meetings to attend the graduation ceremony. The company daycare had prepared an elaborate event, with miniature caps and gowns for all 15 children of Rodriguez Biotech employees. Ethan, already showing leadership qualities that sometimes reminded Sophia painfully of Blake, led his brothers in their memorized recitation of the periodic table, a party trick that delighted the scientists on staff. Noah, the quietest of the three, surprised everyone by volunteering to demonstrate the violin piece he'd been practicing. Liam, ever curious, interrupted the principal's speech to ask why the sky changes colors at sunset, launching an impromptu science lesson. Watching them from the back of the room, Sophia felt the familiar mixture of fierce pride and lingering sadness. They were extraordinary children, brilliant, kind, and surprisingly well-adjusted despite their unconventional family structure. Yet there remained an absence she couldn't fill, questions she couldn't fully answer. That evening, as Sophia prepared dinner in their Cambridge apartment, larger and more comfortable than their early days, but still modest by the standards of someone worth hundreds of millions, Liam ambushed her with the question she'd been dreading. "Why don't we have a dad like the other kids?" he asked, blue eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Sophia nearly dropped the pan she was holding. Noah and Ethan, playing chess at the kitchen table, immediately looked up, equally interested in her response. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsed answers with their family therapist, yet the actual question still caught her off guard. Setting down the spatula, she joined them at the table. Some families have different configurations, she began carefully. Some have a mom and dad, some have two moms or two dads, some have just one parent. We have each other, plus Tio Miguel and Tia Eleanor, Abuela Carmen and Abuelo Eduardo. But where is our dad? Liam persisted, ever the investigator. Did he die? No, he didn't die, Sophia answered truthfully. Your father and I, we weren't able to make a family together. But that doesn't mean I love you any less. In fact, I love you enough for two parents. Does he know about us? This came from Ethan, his expression serious beyond his years. Sophia hesitated, weighing truth against protection. He knew I was expecting you, yes. But he didn't want us, Noah concluded quietly, his perceptiveness piercing straight to the heart of the matter. Sophia gathered all three into her arms, their small bodies warm against her. What happened between your father and me is complicated, and something we'll talk more about when you're older. What you need to know now is that his choices reflect nothing about your worth. You three are the most precious gifts I've ever received. Later, after tucking them into bed with extra stories and reassurances, Sophia sat alone in her home office, surrounded by family photos and children's artwork. The truth that Blake had called them bastards who would never bear his name, that he had offered money to solve the problem, was too cruel to share with 5-year-olds still constructing their sense of self-worth. Yet she knew the day would come when they would need the full story. She opened her laptop and began a document titled, "For My Sons, When You're Ready," recording the unvarnished truth of their origins. Someday, when they were old enough to understand the complexities of privilege, rejection, and redemption, she would share it with them. The following morning, Sophia convened an emergency meeting of Rodriguez Biotech's board of directors. The conference room buzzed with speculation as she laid out her audacious plan. I propose we begin systematically acquiring shares of Thompson Pharmaceuticals, she announced, displaying financial projections on the large screen. Their recent scandals have depressed their stock price to historical lows. Their patents on key medications are among the strongest in the industry, but their pricing model is unsustainable. The board members exchanged concerned glances. You want to acquire our largest competitor? Asked Dr. Hakim, representing the Medical Research Foundation that had invested in their Series B round. That's ambitious, even for you, Sophia. Not immediately, she clarified. A strategic position first, 5% initially, through various investment vehicles that mask our identity. This feels personal, observed Victoria Chang, the venture capitalist who had championed Sophia since the earliest days. Is it? Sophia met her gaze steadily. Thompson Pharmaceuticals represents everything wrong with the industry, prioritizing shareholder value over patient access. Their pricing model has cost countless lives. Yes, it's personal, but not in the way you're implying. Not entirely true, but not entirely false either. The risk is considerable, noted CFO Daniel Friedman. If Thompson realizes we're accumulating shares, they could implement anti-takeover measures. Which is why they won't know it's us, Sophia countered. The purchases will be made through shell companies, investment trusts, and offshore entities. By the time Blake Thompson realizes what's happening, it will be too late. The slight emphasis she placed on Blake's name didn't go unnoticed by Victoria, whose eyes narrowed thoughtfully. After 2 hours of debate, the board approved the initial strategy, a 5% acquisition to be completed over 6 months, with quarterly reassessment before proceeding further. That afternoon, as Sophia reviewed the implementation details with her legal team, her assistant interrupted with breaking news. Blake Thompson just appeared on CNBC, she reported. He's discussing Rodriguez Biotech directly. Sophia turned to the screen mounted on her office wall, increasing the volume to hear Blake's voice, that familiar, cultured Boston accent that still occasionally haunted her dreams. This Rodriguez is clearly an amateur, Blake was saying, immaculate in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Sophia's entire graduate school wardrobe. The company has achieved some short-term market disruption through unsustainable pricing. Their model lacks the sophistication necessary for long-term success in pharmaceutical development. The interviewer leaned forward. Yet they've captured significant market share in cardiac and diabetes medications. Blake's smile was dismissive, the same expression he'd worn when explaining why her distribution ideas were naive years ago. Easy targets with well-established formulations. True innovation requires the research infrastructure only companies like Thompson can sustain. I predict Rodriguez Biotech won't exist in 5 years. Sophia switched off the television, a strange calm settling over her. Blake still had no idea who she was, who was challenging his family's pharmaceutical dynasty. His dismissal of this Rodriguez echoed his dismissal of her years ago when she was just a scholarship student who didn't belong in his world. That evening, Sophia arrived home to find the triplets huddled around their home science kit, conducting an experiment involving baking soda, vinegar, and food coloring that threatened to stain her kitchen ceiling. "Mama!" Liam exclaimed. "We're making volcanoes to understand pressure and chemical reactions." "I see that," she laughed, setting down her briefcase to help contain the eruption. As they cleaned up the colorful mess together, Sophia watched the 3 boys working in perfect coordination, Ethan directing, Noah meticulously measuring, Liam asking endless questions about why each reaction occurred. They were unaware that the man on television, the one dismissing their mother's company, was their biological father. Unaware that he had once called them bastards before they were even born. That night, after the boys were asleep, Sophia finalized the documents authorizing the first purchase of Thompson Pharmaceuticals stock through a Singapore-based investment fund. As she signed the order that might eventually give her control of the company owned by the man who had abandoned her, she couldn't know that in a few months she would be face to face with Blake Thompson on the deck of a luxury yacht, with 3 small boys identical to him running between them. As she signed the order that might eventually give her control of the company owned by the man who had abandoned her, Sophia couldn't know that in a few months she would be face to face with Blake Thompson on the deck of a luxury yacht, with 3 small boys identical to him running between them. The document before her represented more than a business acquisition. It was the culmination of years of determination, pain, and ultimate triumph over the man who had dismissed her as dispensable. 6 years after the birth of the triplets, Sophia's phone lit up with the notification she had been waiting for. The message from her attorney was simple but momentous. Offer accepted. 51% of Thompson Pharmaceuticals shares secured through the consortium. Closing documents expected within 72 hours. Congratulations. Sophia stared at the screen, her hand trembling slightly. She had done it. Through a complex web of investment vehicles, shell companies, and strategic partnerships, Rodriguez Biotech had successfully acquired controlling interest in Thompson Pharmaceuticals without Blake ever discovering the identity of the buyer. "Everything all right, Dr. Rodriguez?" her assistant asked, noticing her momentary stillness. "Better than all right, Janet," Sophia replied, composing herself. "Please clear my schedule for tomorrow evening. I'll need to attend the merger celebration on the Manhattan Legacy." "The yacht event? I didn't realize you were planning to go personally," Janet said, surprise evident in her voice. Sophia typically avoided industry social functions, preferring to let her work speak for itself. "Plans change," Sophia replied simply, "and schedule a shopping trip this afternoon. The boys will need appropriate attire." 2 hours later, Sophia found herself in Boston's most exclusive children's boutique, watching as Ethan, Noah, and Liam tried on miniature versions of sailor outfits, complete with navy blue blazers and crisp white shorts. "Why do we need fancy clothes, Mom?" Liam asked, tugging at his collar as the saleswoman made final adjustments. "We're going to a very special party," Sophia explained, smoothing Noah's hair. "On a huge boat in the harbor." "A real boat? Like in my book about ocean exploration?" Noah's eyes widened with excitement. "Even bigger," Sophia confirmed. "It's called the Manhattan Legacy. Will there be important people there? Ethan asked, always attuned to social dynamics even at 6 years old. Sophia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Yes, very important people. Some of them are part of our company's history. Later that evening, after the boys were asleep, Sophia opened her closet and surveyed its contents. Most of her wardrobe consisted of practical business attire, well-made but understated suits and dresses that projected professional competence rather than wealth or status. For tomorrow's encounter, however, she needed something different. In the back of her closet hung a garment bag she had purchased months ago but never found occasion to wear, a Chanel suit in classic black, its price equivalent to her entire wardrobe budget during her MIT years. She had bought it not for vanity but as armor, knowing that in certain circles, appearance was a form of power. As she laid out the suit, Sophia's mind drifted to the last time she had seen Blake, at that fateful dinner at Beacon Hill restaurant 6 years ago, when he had cruelly dismissed her and their unborn children. She had been wearing a simple dress from a department store sale rack. Tomorrow she would face him as a billionaire entrepreneur, dressed in the uniform of the elite class that had once rejected her. The following morning was a flurry of activity as Sophia prepared the boys for what she had described as a special adventure. She had decided against telling them the full truth about who they might meet. They were too young to understand the complexity, too innocent to be burdened with the knowledge of their father's rejection. "Will the boat have a swimming pool?" Liam asked as Sophia adjusted his tie. "I believe it does," she answered, "but we won't be swimming tonight. This is a business event." "Business is boring," Noah sighed, struggling with his shoelaces. Sophia knelt beside him, helping with the stubborn laces. "Sometimes business changes lives, mi amor. Sometimes it even changes history." By late afternoon, Sophia stood before her full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The Chanel suit fit perfectly, its tailoring emphasizing the confidence and poise she had developed over years of boardroom battles. Her hair, once pulled back in a practical ponytail during her struggling days, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders. The exhausted single mother from 6 years ago was gone, replaced by a woman whose presence commanded respect. "Mama, you look like a queen," Ethan declared when she emerged from her bedroom. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sophia smiled, gathering her 3 identically dressed sons. "Remember what we practiced? Best behavior tonight. This is very important for Mama's company." As their private car approached the harbor, Sophia felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. This wasn't just another business transaction. Tonight would change everything. For Rodriguez Biotech, for Thompson Pharmaceuticals, and most significantly, for the 3 small boys who remained unaware that their biological father would be present. The Manhattan legacy was magnificent even from a distance. 90 meters of gleaming white steel and glass, festooned with lights that reflected off the dark water of Boston Harbor. Worth approximately $120 million, the yacht represented exactly the kind of ostentatious display of wealth that Blake had always valued. "That's the biggest boat I've ever seen," Liam exclaimed as they approached the gangway. "It's not a boat, it's a yacht," Ethan corrected with the authority of a child who had recently learned a new word. "Actually, it's a super yacht," Noah added quietly, having absorbed this fact from one of his many books on maritime vessels. Sophia squeezed their hands reassuringly as they approached the security checkpoint at the base of the gangway. A stern-faced man in a dark suit consulted his tablet. "Name, please?" he asked without looking up. "Sophia Rodriguez and 3 guests," she replied calmly. The security guard glanced up, his expression changing from boredom to confusion as he took in the well-dressed Latina woman with 3 identical boys. He scanned his list again, frowning. "I don't see your name on the approved list, ma'am. This is a private event for Thompson Pharmaceuticals executives and investors." Sophia maintained her composure. "Please check again. Dr. Sophia Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Biotech. We're the company that just acquired 51% of Thompson Pharmaceuticals." The guard's eyes widened. He quickly tapped his earpiece, speaking in hushed tones. After a moment, his demeanor transformed entirely. "Dr. Rodriguez, I apologize for the confusion. Mr. Thompson mentioned the new majority owner would have full access. Please, go right ahead." As they ascended the gangway, Sophia caught sight of Blake through the yacht's panoramic windows. He stood in the center of the main deck, champagne flute in hand, holding court among a circle of admirers. At 38, he remained handsome, though she noted with some satisfaction the early signs of thinning hair at his temples and the slight straining of his jacket buttons, small imperfections in his carefully cultivated image. Before she could prepare herself emotionally for the encounter, the triplets broke free from her grasp, excitement overwhelming their promises of good behavior. They raced ahead onto the polished deck, weaving between elegant guests in evening wear. "Boys, come back here now," Sophia called, hurrying after them. But it was too late. The three 6-year-olds had stopped directly in front of Blake Thompson, looking up at him with identical wide-eyed curiosity. Blake, in mid-conversation with what appeared to be potential investors, glanced down at the interruption. "Are you the owner of this giant boat?" Ethan asked boldly. Blake's expression shifted from mild annoyance to frozen shock as he registered the three faces looking up at him. 3 pairs of blue eyes identical to his own, set in faces that carried unmistakable Thompson features. What?" Blake stammered, his customary eloquence deserting him. Sophia reached the group, her heart pounding. "Ethan, Noah, Liam, I told you to stay with me." Blake's face drained of color as he looked from the boys to Sophia, recognition dawning slowly and then all at once. The champagne flute in his hand tilted dangerously. "Mommy, this man looks like us," Noah exclaimed with innocent wonder, pointing at Blake's face. The conversations around them quieted, guests becoming aware of the unusual tableau forming in their midst. Sophia stood straight-backed in her Chanel suit, 3 identical boys clustered around her legs, facing Blake Thompson, whose expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. "Hello, Blake," Sophia said calmly, the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated for 6 years finally upon them. "I'd like you to meet my sons, Ethan, Noah, and Liam Rodriguez." The silence that followed was absolute. Nearby guests, CEOs, board members, financial journalists watched with undisguised interest, the remarkable resemblance between Blake and the triplets impossible to miss. Blake's champagne finally spilled, liquid spattering across his custom Italian shoes. He didn't seem to notice. You're the buyer?" he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is some kind of elaborate revenge scheme?" Before Sophia could respond, Liam tugged at Blake's pant leg, looking up with innocent curiosity. "Why did you never come visit us, Daddy? Mommy said you were busy building big boats like this." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. She had never told the boys any such thing, had been meticulously careful not to lie about their father, even when the truth was too painful to share fully. Liam, with his remarkable intuition, had connected dots she had tried to keep separate. I don't understand," Blake stammered, looking wildly between Sophia and the boys. "You're the investor who bought controlling interest in my company, and these are your sons," Sophia confirmed quietly, aware of the growing circle of silent observers. Though legally and in every way that matters, they are Rodriguez children. The moment was interrupted by Thomas Blackwood, CEO of Merrill Lynch, who approached with an outstretched hand. "Dr. Rodriguez, what an honor to finally meet you in person," he exclaimed, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension. "Your advances in accessible medications are truly revolutionary. The Nobel Prize for Medicine this year is just the beginning of the recognition you deserve." Around them, the crowd's attention shifted perceptibly. Guests who moments before had been focusing on Blake now gravitated toward Sophia, recognizing that the true power in the room had changed hands. "Blake, perhaps you'd like to properly meet your sons," Sophia suggested, her voice steady despite the emotional maelstrom within. Ethan, Noah, and Liam, the heirs to Rodriguez Biotech, which now owns 51% of Thompson Pharmaceuticals. She hadn't planned to be so direct, but Liam's innocent question had forced her hand. It wasn't planned this way, she added, but it seems fate has a sense of humor. Blake's face flushed deep red as he noticed phones discreetly emerging from pockets and clutches, documenting the extraordinary scene. The pharmaceutical dynasty his family had built over generations had just passed to the woman he had once called dispensable, and to the 3 children he had rejected before they were even born. "We need to talk privately," Blake hissed, reaching for her arm. Sophia stepped back slightly, her expression cool. "As you once told me, don't embarrass me," she replied, quoting his exact words from that night at Beacon Hill. "Anything we need to discuss can be handled through attorneys." When Blake reached toward one of the boys, Ethan, who stood closest, Sophia intercepted his hand with a look that could have frozen Boston Harbor in July. "These boys carry my surname with pride, Blake," she said quietly but firmly. "And now, ironically, they also carry the future of your family's company." While guests continued to approach Sophia, introducing themselves and offering congratulations on the acquisition, Blake stood immobilized, staring at the 3 small versions of himself who were now examining the yacht's features with typical 6-year-old curiosity, unaware that they had just met the father who had once called them bastards. As the car approached the harbor where the magnificent yacht was anchored, Sophia had no idea that the encounter with Blake would be even more dramatic than she had planned, when her sons would instinctively recognize the father they had never known. As the car approached the harbor where the magnificent yacht was anchored, Sophia had no idea that the encounter with Blake would be even more dramatic than she had planned, when her sons would instinctively recognize the father they had never known. The evening air carried the scent of salt and money as the Manhattan Legacy dominated the skyline. 90 meters of gleaming opulence that represented everything Blake Thompson had always valued above human connection. Inside the yacht, Blake circulated among Boston's elite with practiced charm, his custom-tailored Brioni tuxedo a stark contrast to the slight softening around his jawline that expensive creams couldn't quite hide. At 38, he retained the confidence of a man born to privilege, though fine lines had begun to form at the corners of his eyes, testament to the stress of maintaining Thompson Pharmaceuticals' market dominance against increasingly aggressive competition. "To the largest acquisition in Thompson history," Blake announced, raising his crystal flute of Krug champagne to the assembled executives, investors, and financial journalists. "The Horizon Pharmaceuticals purchase solidifies our position as the premier pharmaceutical developer on the East Coast." Approving murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blake had spent years pursuing Horizon, a smaller competitor with promising research pipelines. No one present knew that while Blake celebrated this relatively minor victory, control of his own company had just been quietly transferred to the woman he had once callously abandoned. "Mr. Thompson," a security officer approached discreetly, leaning to whisper in Blake's ear. "There seems to be a situation at the entrance. A woman with 3 children is requesting access, but she's not on the approved list." Blake frowned, glancing toward the entrance. "Children? This is an executive function, not a family cruise. Who would bring children?" From his vantage point on the elevated deck, Blake noticed the security checkpoint where a woman in black was engaged in conversation with the guards. Something about her posture, straight-backed, resolute, nagged at his memory. The 3 small boys beside her, dressed in identical sailor outfits, fidgeted impatiently. "Probably some investor's wife who couldn't find a sitter," Blake muttered dismissively. "Check her credentials again, but keep the disruptions to a minimum." Returning to his conversation with the CFO of Merrill Lynch, Blake didn't notice when the security guard's demeanor suddenly changed from obstructive to deferential. He missed the moment when the guard stepped aside with something approaching reverence, allowing the woman and 3 children to ascend the gangway. Sofia Rodriguez and 3 accompaniments, the woman had said firmly, her voice not carrying to where Blake stood. The security guard's eyes had widened upon finding her name. "Dr. Rodriguez, forgive me, I didn't recognize you. Mr. Thompson said the new majority owner would have full access." Blake was mid-anecdote about his recent helicopter trip to Martha's Vineyard when a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. The 3 small boys had broken free from their mother's grasp and were now racing across the polished teak deck, weaving between startled guests in evening wear. "Boys, come back here now," the woman called, hurrying after them. Blake felt a flash of irritation at the disruption of his carefully orchestrated event. The irritation froze into shock when the 3 children skidded to a halt directly in front of him, looking up with identical faces of wonder and curiosity. "You're the dono deste barco gigante?" asked the one in the middle, his grammar mixing English and Spanish in the way of children raised in bilingual homes. Time seemed to stop as Blake looked down into 3 pairs of eyes that were mirror images of his own, the distinctive Thompson blue that had been passed down through generations of his family, the same eyes that looked back at him from his bathroom mirror every morning, the same eyes his father had and his grandfather before him. What?" Blake stammered, his customary eloquence deserting him. The woman reached the group, slightly breathless. "Ethan, Noah, Liam, I told you to stay with me." Blake's world tilted on its axis as he finally looked at her face. 6 years had transformed Sofia Rodriguez from the exhausted, desperate student he'd abandoned into a confident, radiant executive. Her Chanel suit fit perfectly where once she had worn department store clearance items. Her skin glowed with health where once there had been stress-induced pallor, but her eyes, those determined, intelligent eyes, were unmistakable. "Mommy, this man looks like us!" exclaimed the smallest boy, pointing directly at Blake's face with innocent wonder. Conversations around them died as guests became aware of the unfolding drama. The string quartet in the corner continued playing Vivaldi, an incongruously elegant soundtrack to Blake's world collapsing. "Hello, Blake," Sofia said calmly. "I'd like you to meet my sons, Ethan, Noah, and Liam Rodriguez." The champagne in Blake's hand tilted, expensive bubbles spilling across his hand and onto his Italian leather shoes. He barely noticed. "You're the buyer?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is some kind of elaborate revenge scheme?" Before Sofia could respond, the curious boy tugged at Blake's pant leg. "Why did you never come visit us, Papai? Mommy said you were busy building big boats like this." Sofia paled, clearly caught off guard by her son's declaration. "Liam, I don't understand," Blake interrupted, looking wildly between Sofia and the 3 identical boys. "You're the investor who bought controlling interest in my company, and these are your sons," Sofia confirmed quietly. "Though legally and in every way that matters, they are Rodriguez children." The moment hung between them, heavy with 6 years of absence and abandonment, until Thomas Blackwood, CEO of Merrill Lynch, approached with an outstretched hand. "Dr. Rodriguez, what an honor to finally meet you in person," he exclaimed enthusiastically. "Your advances in accessible medications are truly revolutionary. The Nobel Prize for Medicine this year is just the beginning of the recognition you deserve." Blake watched in stunned silence as the power dynamics in the room shifted tangibly. Guests who moments earlier had been orbiting him now gravitated toward Sofia, recognizing that she, not Blake, was now the gravitational center of pharmaceutical influence in Boston. "Nobel Prize?" Blake repeated faintly, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The mysterious Sofia Rodriguez, who had revolutionized pharmaceutical distribution, who had been featured in Fortune and nominated for a Nobel Prize, was the same woman he had cruelly dismissed at Beacon Hill Restaurant 6 years ago. "Blake, perhaps you'd like to properly meet your sons," Sofia suggested, her voice steady despite the emotional undercurrents. "Ethan, Noah, and Liam, the heirs to Rodriguez Biotech, which now owns 51% of Thompson Pharmaceuticals." She paused, a hint of irony touching her lips. It wasn't planned this way, but it seems fate has a sense of humor. Blake became acutely aware of phones emerging discreetly from pockets and clutches, documenting the extraordinary scene. The pharmaceutical dynasty his family had built over generations had just passed to the woman he had once called dispensable, and to the 3 children he had rejected before they were even born. "We need to talk privately," he hissed, reaching for her arm. Sophia stepped back slightly, her expression cooling. "As you once told me, don't embarrass me," she replied, quoting his exact words from that night at Beacon Hill. "Anything we need to discuss can be handled through attorneys." When Blake reached toward Ethan, who stood closest to him, Sophia intercepted his hand with a look that could have frozen Boston Harbor in July. "These boys carry my surname with pride, Blake," she said quietly but firmly, "and now, ironically, they also carry the future of your family's company." The triplets, oblivious to the tension between the adults, had already lost interest in Blake and were examining the yacht's features with typical 6-year-old curiosity. "Is that a helicopter?" Liam pointed to the helipad at the stern. "Can we see the captain's room?" Noah asked, tugging at Sophia's hand. "It's called the bridge, not the captain's room," Ethan corrected authoritatively. Blake watched them interact, seeing flashes of himself in their mannerisms. Ethan's leadership, Noah's quiet intelligence, Liam's ceaseless curiosity. 6 years of their lives had passed without him, years he could never reclaim. "Sophia," he tried again, his voice lower, more urgent. "Please, 5 minutes in private." Before she could respond, Eleanor White approached, impeccably dressed in her role as Rodriguez Biotech's chief science officer. "The Minister of Health from Singapore would like to discuss our distribution model for Southeast Asia," she informed Sophia, pointedly ignoring Blake, "and the Gates Foundation representatives are eager to finalize the vaccine accessibility program." "I'll be right there," Sophia nodded, then turned back to Blake. "As you can see, I have actual business to conduct. Your father will be briefed tomorrow on the transition of leadership. I suggest you prepare him gently. At his age, shocks can be dangerous." The calculated kindness in this last comment, her concern for his father's health despite everything, struck Blake like a physical blow. He watched helplessly as Sophia guided the boys toward a cluster of influential guests, all eagerly waiting to meet the woman who had revolutionized pharmaceutical pricing while simultaneously executing one of the most stunning corporate takeovers in Boston history. For the remainder of the evening, Blake moved through his own celebration like a ghost, watching as Sophia effortlessly commanded the room that should have been his domain. Investors who had declined his calls for months crowded around her, eager to align themselves with Rodriguez Biotech's vision. Scientists whose research Thompson had rejected as commercially unviable discussed breakthrough treatments that would save millions of lives under Sophia's leadership. The 3 boys, his sons, charmed everyone they met, their precocious intelligence and natural poise drawing admiration from even the most hardened executives. Several times Blake caught himself moving toward them, drawn by some primal paternal instinct, only to stop when he encountered Sophia's watchful gaze. As the evening wound down, Blake found himself alone at the yacht's rail, staring out at Boston's twinkling skyline. The city that had always been Thompson territory now belonged to Rodriguez. The empire his grandfather had built, that his father had expanded, and that he had expected to pass to his own heirs someday, had been lost in a single evening. "She's remarkable," said a voice beside him. Blake turned to find Thomas Blackwood, the Merrill Lynch CEO, nursing a scotch. "Everyone in finance has been trying to figure out her secret for years. Now I understand." "What do you mean?" Blake asked hoarsely. Blackwood gestured toward where Sophia stood across the deck, the 3 boys now sleepy-eyed beside her as the evening grew late. "She's fighting for something bigger than profit margins. Those boys, your boys apparently, they're her why. The most powerful motivation in business isn't greed, Thompson. It's purpose." Blake watched as Sophia gathered her sons preparing to leave, For a brief moment, their eyes met across the crowded deck, hers confident and resolved, his confused and devastated. In that single look, he understood that everything had changed. The woman he had once dismissed as dispensable now controlled his family legacy, and the children he had rejected were the heirs to a pharmaceutical revolution that made his own achievements seem hollow. While guests continued to approach Sophia, introducing themselves and offering congratulations on the acquisition, Blake stood immobilized, staring at the three small versions of himself who were now examining the yacht's features with typical 6-year-old curiosity, unaware that they had just met the father who had once called them bastards. While guests continued to approach Sophia, introducing themselves and offering congratulations on the acquisition, Blake stood immobilized, staring at the three small versions of himself who were now examining the yacht's features with typical 6-year-old curiosity, unaware that they had just met the father who had once called them bastards. The consequences of that fateful night on the Manhattan Legacy were swift and merciless. Blake awoke the following morning to his phone vibrating incessantly on his nightstand. Notifications flooded his screen, missed calls from board members, text messages from his publicist, and dozens of news alerts. With growing dread, he opened the Wall Street Journal app to find his humiliation splashed across the digital front page. Herdeiro Thompson encontra filhos que não sabia existir, no dia em que perde controle da empresa familiar. The American headline was equally devastating. Thompson heir meets unknown triplets as family loses control of pharmaceutical empire. Below the headline was a photo that made his stomach lurch. Sophia standing poised and confident in her Chanel suit, the three boys looking up at him with identical expressions of innocent curiosity, and Blake himself with the stunned look of a man watching his world collapse. The photographer had captured the exact moment of recognition, when the color had drained from his face as he realized who stood before him. Within hours, social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons of Blake and the triplets. The resemblance was undeniable. The same piercing blue eyes, the same jawline, even the same slight tilt of the head when concentrating. Comments ranged from sympathetic to scathing, with hashtags like Josh Thompson triplets and Rodriguez revenge trending nationally. His phone rang again, his father this time. "Is it true?" William Thompson demanded without preamble, his voice strained in a way Blake had never heard before. "This Rodriguez woman, those boys, are they yours?" "Dad, I can explain." "Answer the question, Blake." "Yes," he admitted, the words sticking in his throat. "But I didn't know." "You didn't know she kept them? Or you didn't know she was the one buying our company?" His father's voice was cold. "Either way, you've destroyed a legacy 3 generations in the making." The call ended abruptly, leaving Blake alone in his penthouse with the crushing weight of his father's disappointment. At 9:30 that morning, Blake's phone lit up with another notification, a calendar invite from Rodriguez Thompson Pharmaceuticals for the first joint board meeting scheduled for 11 o'clock. The company name had already changed in the system, the Thompson legacy relegated to second position. Blake arrived at the Thompson headquarters, soon to be renamed, 15 minutes early, only to find the boardroom already occupied. Sophia sat at the head of the table, the position his father had held for 30 years and that Blake had occupied for the past 5. She wore a tailored burgundy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and clear eyes. "Blake," she acknowledged with a slight nod, neither warm nor openly hostile. "Please, take a seat." He hesitated, glancing at the chair to her right, traditionally the second-in-command's position. "Actually," Sophia clarified, following his gaze, "your seat is 3 down. Dr. White and Miguel will be sitting beside me as Chief Science Officer and Chief Operations Officer, respectively." The symbolism wasn't lost on Blake. As other board members filed in, a mixture of Thompson veterans looking shell-shocked and Rodriguez executives exuding quiet confidence, he slid into his assigned seat, acutely aware of his diminished status. The meeting began with Sophia outlining her vision for the newly merged company. Her presentation was flawless. Detailed financial projections, strategic research priorities, and a comprehensive plan to reduce the prices of essential medications by 70% while maintaining profitability through revolutionary distribution channels. "This is financially impossible," interrupted Thompson's longtime CFO, Gerald Hammond. "We've run the numbers for years. You can't slash prices this dramatically without sacrificing research capabilities or shareholder returns." Sophia smiled slightly. "Perhaps you've been asking the wrong questions, Mr. Hammond. You've been calculating how to maintain 80% profit margins while making minimal price concessions. We've designed an entirely new model that delivers 15% margins while reaching 5 times the patient population." Hammond scoffed. "No pharmaceutical company can survive on 15% margins." "Rodriguez Biotech has been doing exactly that for 5 years, Sophia countered. "Our return to investors has outpaced Thompson's by 28% despite, or rather because of, our pricing structure." As the presentation continued, Blake watched the room's dynamics shift. The Thompson executive's skepticism gradually gave way to reluctant respect as Sophia detailed innovative approaches to problems they had considered unsolvable. Even Hammond fell silent when she demonstrated how their combined research capabilities could accelerate breakthrough treatments while actually lowering development costs. "How did you do it?" asked Thomas Blackwell, one of the oldest Thompson directors, after Sophia had walked them through her patient-centered distribution model. "We've tried for years to reduce costs without sacrificing margins." "Perhaps you were trying to protect bonuses and yachts, not patients," Sophia replied, her eyes briefly meeting Blake's across the table. The meeting concluded with a vote on the new corporate structure. Sophia as CEO, her trusted lieutenants in key positions, and Blake reassigned to Director of Strategy, a position that sounded important but carried no real decision-making authority. It was a courtesy title, designed to save face while stripping him of power. 2 weeks after the boardroom restructuring, Blake stood outside Sophia's office, 3 identical teddy bears tucked awkwardly under his arm and handwritten cards clutched in his hand. Her assistant regarded him with thinly veiled suspicion. "Dr. Rodriguez is on a call with the WHO Director General. She might be a while." Blake nodded, settling into a visitor's chair to wait. The Rodriguez-Thompson headquarters, formerly Thompson's exclusive domain, had been rapidly transformed. Where once there had been oil paintings of Thompson patriarchs, now hung photographs of patients whose lives had been saved by accessible medications. The executive floor, previously restricted to senior management, now featured a state-of-the-art childcare center where employees' children, including Sophia's triplets, received education alongside daycare. 20 minutes later, Sophia's door opened. She paused momentarily upon seeing Blake, then nodded to her assistant. "It's fine, Janet. I can spare 15 minutes." Inside her office, once his father's, then his, Blake felt disoriented by the changes. Gone was the mahogany furniture and leather-bound medical texts, replaced by modern functional pieces and walls covered with children's artwork. A photograph on her desk showed the triplets at what appeared to be a science fair, their faces alight with excitement as they displayed a project on DNA extraction. "What can I do for you, Blake?" Sophia asked, remaining standing rather than taking a seat behind her desk. He held out the teddy bears and cards awkwardly. "I want to meet my sons. Properly." Sophia's expression remained neutral. "Why now? You've had 6 years." "I didn't know they existed," he protested. "Not really. Not beyond dismissing the possibility that I was carrying your children? Beyond offering me money to solve the problem?" Her voice remained even, professional, though the words themselves carried the weight of their history. Blake placed the bears on a nearby chair. "I know I don't deserve it, but they do. They deserve to know their father." "No, Blake," Sophia corrected him. "What they deserve is stability, not a father who appears when he discovered they are heirs to an empire." I can change, Blake insisted, a note of desperation entering his voice. Let's have dinner, all 5 of us, please. Sophia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The power dynamic between them had completely reversed. Once he had been the arbiter of her fate, deciding she was unworthy of his world. Now she held his future in her hands. I'll do something better, she finally said. Family therapy, with a psychologist specialized in parental reunification. If you're genuinely interested in knowing them, and not just in recovering control of the company, that's the path forward. Therapy? Blake repeated, the concept foreign to his upbringing where Thompson men handled problems with money, not emotions. Yes, therapy, Sophia confirmed. First individual sessions for you, then supervised meetings with the boys when the therapist believes you're ready. This isn't a negotiation, Blake. It's the only option I'm offering. In the weeks that followed, Blake surprised himself by embracing the therapy process. Dr. Levinson, a no-nonsense psychologist specializing in high-conflict family reunifications, forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his priorities, privilege, and the damage his abandonment had caused. Why do you want to know these children now? Dr. Levinson had asked in their first session. They're my sons, Blake had answered automatically. They were your sons 6 years ago when you told their mother they would never carry your surname, the therapist countered. What's changed? The question haunted Blake through 4 weeks of intensive therapy, forcing introspection he had avoided his entire life. The first supervised meeting with the triplets took place in a neutral playroom at Dr. Levinson's office. Blake arrived 30 minutes early, pacing nervously as he waited. When Sophia finally entered with the 3 boys, his heart contracted painfully at the sight of them, dressed not in the formal sailor outfits from the yacht, but in ordinary children's clothes, sneakers scuffed from playground use. Boys, this is Mr. Thompson, Sophia introduced him carefully. He's going to spend some time getting to know you today. Are you really our biological father? Ethan asked directly, using terminology that seemed advanced for a 6-year-old. Yes, Blake answered, kneeling to their level. I am. Why haven't we met you before? Noah questioned, his quiet voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Blake glanced at Sophia, who nodded slightly, indicating he should answer truthfully but appropriately. I made mistakes, he said simply. Big ones, and I've missed knowing you because of them. Do you like dinosaurs? Liam interjected, apparently satisfied with this explanation and ready to move to more important matters. Yes, I suppose I do, Blake replied, caught off guard by the conversational shift. Good, Liam declared, because I have many questions about the biomechanical plausibility of Brachiosaurus neck structures that my science teacher couldn't answer. To Blake's surprise, he found himself genuinely enjoying the time with the boys, even when they spoke in scientific terminology he barely understood or showed more interest in DNA extraction than in sports or typical children's activities. They were nothing like he would have expected his sons to be, and yet he found himself increasingly fascinated by their unique personalities. 6 months after the confrontation on the yacht, the merged Rodriguez-Thompson Pharmaceuticals announced a groundbreaking program to make essential medications accessible to underserved populations globally. The press release featured a photo of the new leadership team, Sophia as CEO flanked by her original team members, with Blake positioned off to the side as Director of Strategy. That Sunday, following a supervised visit to the Museum of Science with the triplets, Blake and Sophia sat on a bench in Boston Common while the boys explored a nearby playground under the watchful eye of their nanny. Did you plan all of this? Blake finally asked, the question that had haunted him for months. Buying my company? Humiliating me publicly? Sophia smiled, watching her sons playing in the distance. Life rarely follows plans, Blake. When you abandoned me, my only plan was to survive to raise our children. The rest happened because I had to prove, to myself, not to you, that your words were wrong. And you proved it, he admitted. The empire my family built in 3 generations, You surpassed in 6 years. The difference is that I never built thinking about empires, she replied. I built thinking about people who couldn't afford their medications. Success was a consequence, not a goal. Blake observed the triplets, seeing himself and Sophia reflected in them. Will they ever forgive me for not being there? That depends more on you than on them, Sophia answered, standing up. We are no longer trapped in the past, Blake. I am no longer that desperate student, and you are no longer the arrogant heir. We are just two people trying to do what's best for 3 extraordinary boys. As they walked to gather the children, Blake finally understood the magnitude of all he had lost, and the small miracle of having a second chance he didn't deserve. Not with Sophia, whose indifference was more painful than any resentment could be, but with 3 small scientists who shared his genes and their mother's brilliance. While the sun set over Boston, the city where everything had begun, an unlikely family attempted to rebuild something that had never really existed before, but which might, just might, find its own path to healing. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.